Hey folks, welcome to this week's astrological report. This is for November 4 through November 10 of 2025. Hope you're all doing well. So this week we have a lot of major aspects taking place. We have some planetary sign changes, retrograde, and the main event we're building up to is the Taurus full moon. That's going to be exact on Wednesday, November 5. Definitely be talking about that, but let me go ahead and list all the major aspects first, and then I'll talk about the possible meaning of it. So we start things off with Mars at the last critical degree of Scorpio for Tuesday, and Mars will ingress into Sagittarius first thing on the morning, Tuesday, November 4. So that's going to be a pretty big change for gears, how people are taking action, what motivates people. Now, Mars does lose some of its strength from Scorpio to Sag, but it's not a bad placement in Sagittarius. But because the sun is being ruled by Mars, it's also going to kind of change the flavor of what we're focused on and how we're focused on certain things. Plus, the full moon is going to bring things to light and a turning point as well that affects our focus. So I'll talk more about that. But right as Mars comes into Sagittarius for Tuesday, it's also opposing Uranus, backing up to 0 degrees, 0 minutes this week. So that's a little bit of an excitement, a little bit of volatility, but Mars is also going to sextile Pluto. So Mars is really connecting to all of the outer planets, showing that we have connections, we have influences that are driving us. And as Mars comes into fire, it's going to be a lot more instinctive. So I'll describe more about that as I'm going through the report. But we also have Venus starting to make some changes. Now, Venus will be in charge, or rather the ruler of the Taurus full moon on Wednesday in a very strong position. And this is a really important full moon about money and resources that's been building for the last roughly 6 months. I'm going to show you the connection with that as I talk about the full moon. But Venus will be making an in conjunction to Neptune, and then Venus will be changing signs, ingressing Scorpio. So that's going to really affect relationships and money as we move forward past this full moon. Venus doesn't really like being in Scorpio, so it is a little more of a challenging placement. But on the other hand, Scorpio gets Venus, which can be, nice for Scorpios. Although, it brings relationships to a deeper level, more vulnerability in relationship, and some few challenges that come along with it that I'll talk about. Okay, and then we have Venus will be making an in conjunction to Uranus, and then that's followed up by Uranus backing up into Taurus for the final transit of Taurus this roughly next 6 months. I'll talk about who's most affected by that and what it might mean globally. Right after that change of Uranus, Venus will square Pluto. So that's going to be a really powerful dynamic. That's going to be exact, looks like on Friday. Yeah, that's Friday, November 7. Is when Uranus changes signs and Venus squares Pluto. And then, looks like this weekend we have the sun making aspects to the nodes of fate. So Saturday, November 8 could be a fateful day. We'll be taking a look at the chart for that as I go through for Saturday. And then on Sunday is when Mercury officially stations retrograde in Sagittarius. So Mercury's gone as far forward as it can. It's going to retrograde back to Scorpio, but it's going to pretty much be in this area between Sag and Scorpio for the rest of 2025. It's going to enter new territory by mid-December. So there's a lot to go over with that. And let's see, looks like by next Monday, just mostly lunar aspects. Now, Jupiter has reached 25 degrees, the degree that it is going to station retrograde in, but that's going to be by next week, I believe Tuesday. So next week's report, Jupiter will be stationary retrograde. It's going as far forward as it can this week, but it's pretty much not moving. It's pretty much just over amplified for the next couple weeks as it's starting to station, and that's in the background. We still have Neptune here at 29. This is going to be the theme for the rest of the year. Neptune at 29 Pisces it's a little bit of an extremism about everything Neptune. And it's also like the peak of BS in the world. Whether we're not going to see it all, there's a lot of things that are hidden about this. It's also on a storm level. It's showing, major water and storm events for the rest of the year and even the first part of next year. And really, even when it's at 0 Aries, it's still right in this really powerful spot. I would say for the next 2 years, extreme weather is probably going to be extra amplified. I know that they say that that's going to be the theme forever, but it's in astrology, it's showing, it's reflecting that it's at this most extreme right now, actually, with 29 Pisces. We definitely have a lot of water still going on, but I think with Mars leaving Scorpio, coming into Sag, that's going to be probably, I kind of like it actually. I kind of like it a little better coming into Sag, just because we do have so much water already. And maybe it's good for you if you have a lot of water, but this is a tough spot with this Saturn-Neptune at the end of Pisces. I really felt it come back compared to Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, and all this new era that we came into this last few months through the summer. That's better for my chart personally, because I'm mostly fire and air, but it all depends on your own personal chart, how it affects you. But a lot of water doesn't really vibe well with my personal chart. So we have to get through, this Saturn, Neptune for the next few months. Going back to the past, going back to past energetic things that weren't necessarily easy for a lot of people. And we are in the deep side of the zodiac right now in Scorpio season, but this full moon is going to try to bring us a little more balance with Earth. But things have to change in our Taurus area because the true focus is opposite in Scorpio. So these are all the major aspects, and you can find them, as always, written out in the description below. There's timestamps to follow along throughout the week if you want to go by day here. So let me put this on the hour, and we're going to start going through Tuesday. I kind of want to mention, I'll talk about the full moon when I get there. Let me just go through Tuesday first, and then I'll talk about the full moon for Wednesday, November 5, because we do have a lot here for Tuesday. There's really no easy aspects for Tuesday. We start things off with the moon at the end of Aries for Tuesday, November 4. First thing in the morning, the early morning hours. For most people, it'll be the moon in Taurus. But if you're up really early, or if you're in Europe, you might be getting a part of this moon in Aries, which starts things off with the square to Jupiter. As Jupiter is more powerful than normal because it's slowing down to station. So moon square Jupiter, that shows the mood is big. The mood is over amplified. Circumstances could be over amplified. You have to be careful of making a big deal about things for good or bad, because again, things are a little bit out of balance with that just for a few hours, early morning hours, or there can literally be big things going on that are a little bit over the top. Plus the moon is right next to Chiron. So it activates that square that we've been dealing with for a while already between Jupiter and Chiron about the self and needs and feelings and sensitivities and injuries and just a little bit of this tension that's been in the background for people. It could talk about people's confidence in a lot of ways too, and also about taking a risk versus being more cautious, safe and secure. But for the most part, a lot of people will be sleeping probably through that aspect. And then the moon is opposing Venus, really early morning hours as well for Tuesday. And the moon is as far away from Venus as possible with the opposition. So it's a little more challenging to sometimes feel 100% content, especially because the moon is square Jupiter. We might be reaching for something, trying to be fulfilled by something, and it's maybe hard to hit the sweet spot or be totally satisfied. But also it comes back to when the moon was conjunct Venus, and things about relationships could also start to come to a head in the temporary with the opposition. And then again, first thing in the morning, we're going to have 2 planets, including the moon, changing signs. And the first one is Mars ingressing Sagittarius. So again, this is a really big dynamic change now for Scorpio and also for Aries, where the moon is. It's like a change of gears, as I was saying. So we're coming out of this really powerful Mars in its own sign of Scorpio, which deals a little more with what's under the surface and a little more covertly, and it has usually more of a solid plan. It's usually more controlled. Now we're coming into a Mars in Sag, which wants to go big with action. It's more fiery, it's more instinctive, and things can really get exciting perhaps from this point forward, because Mars is also starting to oppose Uranus. And so Mars coming into Sagittarius is going to put more energy into your area of life that has Sagittarius, which is a big sign. It likes to go big with things. Mars in Sag. It's also more adventurous. It's also taking action based on beliefs and faith in things. So with the moon still in Aries, it's going to also really amplify people's emotional need for action, but there is going to be a mood change later on, So again, I think people in Europe might be most affected by the moon in Aries before it changes into Taurus, because they're probably, it's earlier, it's in the morning. This is still pretty early. It's roughly about the 6 o'clock hour Mountain Standard Time. So that's 5:30-ish on the West Coast that Mars is making this change, but you can see the exact time in the description below. Now, this is also where Mercury is starting to slow down and losing its momentum. And so Mars is now catching back up with Mercury. So it's going to really increase this influence that we've already had for a while of Mars, Mercury, really mentally stimulated, especially the fact that Uranus is opposition to this. It's a little bit crazy. It's a little bit wild. It has a little bit of a rebellious vibe to it. And it just increases people's communication to be more blunt, to be more direct. And again, generally speaking, the world and how people are taking action, what triggers people's anger, things like this are just more instinctive and less controlled, less thinking about it and just acting more, impulsively, instinctively, and things like that. But it can also be good. I still think it's not a bad placement for Mars. It's just that Mars is in these dynamics with Uranus and Mercury. It changes just the normal Mars and Sagittarius. So you don't have this most likely in your birth chart. You don't. You weren't born with Uranus in Gemini opposite Mars and Sagittarius. So nobody has this except, newborns. But it just changes the overall flavor of the action. So I still think it's much more of an adventurous placement, especially with Mars next to Mercury in Sagittarius. That has a lot to say about traveling. There is some caution, though, about traveling with this, because there could still be some issues. Mercury is about to slow down to go retrograde. It's not technically stopped yet, but it's barely moving here. And so there could still be issues with travel and transportation, so you have to plan ahead, but you also have to be flexible and adaptable when you're traveling this week and next week. Have a backup plan. Just be prepared for something to change or something to go awry or something happening here that could be unpredictable, or something like that is possible. And it doesn't mean just instantly right here on Tuesday, although it could show on Tuesday. It could show any day of the week. Remember, I'm always showing you guys the exact aspect when it's happening, but there's orbs of influence. So it could happen, throughout this week. There could just be some possible disruptions in ways that we weren't expecting. But it's also going to really enhance people's opinions, really fiery opinions and beliefs that are more outward, more blunt, more direct. And again, with Mars coming into Sagittarius, it changes our focus a little bit, because the sun is being ruled by Mars. So there's a change of gears that we're coming into for the rest of the week and how we proceed forward. It still wants to be probably a lot more adventurous. There's probably a lot more outward drive for people, generally speaking, because we still have a ton of water that's still showing there's emotions and feelings in the air in the background, and people's need for safety and security and more inward. And, all this Pisces can sometimes pull people into their own world. Escapism, drugs, alcohol, avoidance, kind of just disappearing, But now we have this new influence here that's going to kind of start to counterbalance that a little bit with more outward activity, more outward action. and things like that. It could also show that, with Mars coming in here and with the opposition to Uranus and then Mercury slowing down, things could start to change around education, both higher, lower education in different places around the world. I think in the bigger picture, that's definitely going to be a part of the new era that we're coming into with Neptune changing signs. Education is going to be going through major reforms and just general changes in policies and how education is ran. So I do think, as I've said many times, with Neptune in Pisces squaring Sagittarius for so many years, squaring Gemini, it's been distorting truth. It's been distorting facts, details. It's been distorting the media, information. We've been in it for so long, it's really hard to see the details of it because even the details have been distorted with the opposition to Virgo. But these eclipses are trying to give us a clean slate for all that. And now we're kind of back into that a little bit. We've fallen back into this Neptune squaring Sag and squaring Gemini. And so we're not quite to the other side until we get to the second half of 2026 when all these outer planets are back in their new signs and we're moving forward. And we're going to be seeing things a lot different. We started to get a glimpse of this change, with Neptune and Aries. And Neptune and Aries has its own problems, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot different from Neptune in the mutable signs, especially Neptune in Pisces in the last degree of the zodiac here. So we still have some issues to get through around truth and belief and faith and understanding and details and media and information. That's just to be real, this shows astrologically, this shows 100% we're back in some delusional territory in the world, what's going on globally right now, and what we'll be picking up for the next few months before we're fully done with this Saturn-Neptune in Pisces. So there might be this final battle between truth with different ideas and concepts, but overall it's going to be changing the educational system. So something could get stirred up within education this week and beyond here in the temporary. But I also think it's about travel, So again, take your time, plan, and be open to changes just in case. It doesn't mean every single person will have a traveling issue, but when we look at events that happen in the world, there's usually something that gets the headlines or something, and there's already been a lot of issues because Mars has been next to Mercury. Mars next to Mercury plus Mercury slowing down to go retrograde could also, again, continue to show some issues about mechanical breakdowns or other electronics or media, everything mercurial like technology things could also be going through a few glitches here and there with this change for Mars. And Mars opposite Uranus, it's more rebellious. It's more wanting to take a risk, wanting to do something different, but it's mostly also affecting the streets, what's going on in the streets with the opposition to Gemini, with communications and media getting stirred up with new dynamics this week, and a change of flavor for, again, what drives people, what motivates people. So just check yourself, check your impulsiveness, and make sure you don't get carried away with anything without thinking about it. Now, as the day goes on, we're going to have this mood change as the moon will ingress Taurus. And again, this is where the moon is exalted. This is the beginning of the full moon vibes. Even though the full moon is the next day on Wednesday, it kind of starts here on Tuesday as it ingresses this sign. But the moon has to get through some stuff here, including a square to Pluto. So there's a mood change. The moon coming into Taurus says, let's try to keep things more beautiful, more calm, more stable. But yet we're running into some challenges with the groups, with the friends, the community, the network. There could be some power plays. There can be some forced changes and transformations going on first thing Tuesday, the first half of Tuesday. Now that the moon is in Taurus for the next 2.5 days, it's being ruled by Venus, and Venus is very strong. So we do have some dignity here. We have a strong moon, we have a strong Jupiter, we have a strong Venus for the short term. But there's still some undercurrents of things going on here things tend to want to slow down a little bit to, again, become more stable, more reliable. And it could also just kind of increase more about relationships, since it is being ruled by Venus in the sign of relationship. But the moon connecting to Aquarius would tend to show like relationships on all kinds of levels, like friends and community and things like that. And then we have the moon making an in conjunction to Mars in its new sign here. So we're having to adjust between these two different vibes. Mars in Sagittarius, wanting to go big, wanting to take a risk, wanting to be more active and adventurous and have more freedom and independence and being a little more wild, with the opposition to Uranus. But Taurus moon wants to keep things stable and safe and secure and comfortable. So we're having to adjust the moon, the feelings, the circumstances, to what we impulsively or instinctively are driven by first thing on Tuesday. And again, there's a lot of tension here all day for Tuesday, with all these different aspects that are mostly challenging. And the last aspect is the moon making the in conjunction to Mercury. So the heart and the mind are kind of on two different pages. It comes back to kind of what I said about moon Mars. Again, this more going over the top, bigger energy, more outward, fiery, passionate, really direct with our communications, mental stimulation and a lot of activity, versus wanting to keep things chill and nice and calm and peaceful with the moon in Taurus. So how people feel versus how they think and communicate are kind of on two different pages, generally speaking, for Tuesday. And those are all the major aspects. There's a lot there. Again, a lot of tension and some energetic changes. Until we get to the following day on Wednesday, November 5, and this is the full moon day. So let me align the chart perfectly to the full moon. And I have a lot to say about this because it is connected to what's going on in the markets right now. One second here. Let me align this. 13 degrees, 22 minutes. Oh, sorry here. Getting distracted. Okay. 23 minutes. 22. Okay, it is 22. All right, so the full moon is at 13 degrees, 22 minutes of Taurus. And it's going to be exact first thing in the morning for the West Coast, early morning on Wednesday, November 5. And really, this is like the least active day as far as aspects go. It's just really the full moon, the main event of the week, where it's peak emotional energy of the month, and everything's kind of coming to a head. But this is an exalted full moon. An exalted full moon ruled by Venus in its home sign. So this is actually a very powerful and generally a positive full moon that we have here. The moon, as far as aspects, it looks like it just has a trine and a sextile to the nodes of fate. So it's also a very fateful full moon that will have a connection to the long-term future based on what's coming out, what's coming to light with this. But this is where we are reaching the high point of the past roughly 6 months, a little over 6 months, when we had a Taurus new moon back in late April of 2025. And actually, I pulled up that chart just to take a peek at real quick. I'll show you. Here was that Taurus new moon back in April 27, and that new moon in Taurus was ruled by Venus, exalted in Pisces conjunct Saturn and the North Node of Destiny. And I remember telling you guys back then how this is a positive full moon for the market. a new moon for the markets and value and money and all that. But it's not about instant gratification because it's ruled by Venus next to Saturn. But because Venus was exalted, it still had a high amount of value for the long term. It just wasn't instant. And so now we reach the full moon here in this sign, connected to this cycle that started in April. And April was the low point for the stock market. April was when we were at the bottom of the market. Let me pull this back up. April was when we were at the bottom, when we had that big dip from the tariffs and all that stuff, and everybody was going crazy, and thinking it was all really bad for the long-term future. And I was telling everybody, no, we're going to go back up. And again, now we've reached the high point for that Taurus new moon back in April. And so and we're looking at the stock market right now, including the S&P. It's all at all-time highs. So technically, this is the high point of that cycle that started in April, the low. So this is the high of the low. It doesn't mean that the market can't still go up a little more. But if we just go off of astrology, this would kind of indicate this could be a temporary high that we're kind of reaching for November, especially the fact that Venus is going to be changing signs into Scorpio, where it's debilitated a little bit and going through some aspects. But there's also counterbalances to this that could change it a little more. And so I'm not 100% certain that this is like the main high, because I still feel like we could still go a little bit higher by the end of the, from now through the end of the year. But astrologically, this is the high point of money and resources, generally speaking, for the world based on the Taurus cycle. And that's what a full moon is about. A full moon is about the peak of that area of the zodiac and a change, a turning point from that point forward. So we are at a turning point around value, money, but it's also a very strong high point, and we're seeing that reflected in the markets with the all-time highs, ruled by Venus in a strong sign. So both the new moon was ruled by a strong Venus and the full moon in Taurus is ruled by a strong Venus. So it's like, generally speaking, this is where we are kind of reaching the peak of money and resources and value of what's been building up for roughly the last 6 to 7 months. Now, it's especially true wherever you have Taurus in your birth chart. So what area of life do you have Taurus in? We all have it somewhere. It rules a certain area, and that's where there's a turning point. That's where something is being illuminated for you to see. That's where something needs to end or change. And again, the main focus is in Scorpio, the underworld, what's deeper, what's below the surface and hidden. And Scorpio is also about trying to find value in things that money can't buy. It's more than just the materialistic world, but this is a full moon that's trying to bring a balance between these two different sides of the zodiac. What's physical and material and pleasurable, the 5 senses, and what's earthly versus what is below the surface, and what's deeper, what's yours versus others, kind of at a turning point between money and resources and sharing money and resources, and things like that. But just check your chart, see where you have Taurus. What area of life is that for you? Especially 13 degrees, 22 minutes. That's where it's exact. And if you have a personal planet right there at 13 degrees, and even one, on either side of it within a few degrees, then this full moon could be very important for whatever that planet is in your chart. But if you do have a personal planet here around this part of the zodiac, around 13, Taurus, then this should be a very significant full moon for you that will show changes for the next 6 months. And it kind of also is this change for Taurus where after this full moon, Uranus is coming back to Taurus for the next 6 months. And again, there's some changes that need to take place for Taurus overall. That could include people that have Taurus sun, or other main planets in Taurus. But for all of us, wherever we have Taurus, whatever area of life that is, we're at a turning point. Something's ready to change and end. And whatever that is going to most likely be illuminated for us to see over this next couple of weeks. And then we'll get, 2 weeks from now, we'll get to the Scorpio new moon, and we're going to go into a cycle of depth about truth and understanding, because it'll be kind of, again, this Mercury going back and forth between what's above and beyond, but what's deeper and hidden at the same time. So we kind of also have to end something in order for us to go deeper as well. It's not just about the physical side of life and the pleasures of life, because again, we're kind of reaching a peak for all those physical things in the temporary. But this is just a normal temporary cycle. It doesn't mean forever or the big long-term picture. This is just a temporary high point around value and resources. And I think it can affect relationships too, since it does come back to Venus at the end of Libra, about to change the dynamics in love and relationship and pleasure. So again, the main aspects is the connection to the north node of destiny that the moon is making, and the connection to the south node in Virgo. So it's connecting again to the practical side of life. This is a full moon that can also help illuminate where we stand in the areas of health and work and service, and these changes that people have been making around work and money. This is kind of a turning point for work and money from this point forward. And it doesn't mean just instantly right on Wednesday. Again, this is connected to a 6-month cycle. So there's going to be a lot of changes that we have to make physically and about money and resources connected to our work and what's been being restructured in work, or again, health matters and money over the next 6 months. And then by the time we get to the end of April into May, and we come back into a new Taurus cycle, then we're going to be moving forward with new dynamics. But this is the waning part of the year cycle for Taurus. It's still a good one, though. It's still, again, we need to balance out what's above, what's physical, and versus what's below and hidden. But what's below and hidden is still the main focus. This moon is just temporary for this week, and the sun is here in a longer position. Plus, we'll be starting that cycle rooted in Scorpio. So things need to change in your Taurus area, endings and beginnings in your Taurus area of life, but it's usually more about endings, something reaching its fullness and its peak. But pay attention to what comes out this week, because that will kind of illuminate where you stand with the physical side of life, where you stand with money and resources and your pleasures and your needs, your values, could be at a turning point for some people. This is generally speaking for the world. The value for the world, it's culminating with illumination. But what needs to change? What values are now outdated or need to change? Plus, with Uranus coming back to Taurus, we still have to revolutionize Taurus for one last time for the long-term future before Taurus is perfectly stable again after this long transit of Uranus in Taurus. So we might need to let go of some old values to update our values, including our values with relationship and connecting to other people and things like that, because it does come back to Venus in Libra. So that's how I'm looking at this full moon. It's a high point for money and resources in the markets in the temporary. I still think, though, because of Jupiter-Saturn, I would not be surprised if we went a little bit higher, though. I think we're pretty close to the top, but I can't exactly just guarantee it just based off of this chart and this full moon. Like, I'd have to go deeper. But generally speaking, I think that we are getting close to the high, temporary high. It doesn't mean the all-time, like what's next level, before we have another big pullback or something. I don't think it's quite the high of the bull market, though. I really don't. But again, I can only say so much just looking at this chart without going into other details about the overall market. But I do think that there's a strong chance we could be at a little bit of a turning point by the end of this week around market stuff. But it's not going to be like any kind of a crisis or anything. Even though people love to talk about it, people make all kinds of big predictions all the time that don't come true in astrology. I see it all the time because people want things to be sensationalized and extreme, and not everything is always that way. We are at an extreme turning point in time of the world and how it's being restructured for sure, but that's in a bigger context over the next few years. But not everything has to be some huge event every week in astrology. Like, not every full moon and new moon is life-changing. It doesn't have to be all that big. But this is seems like a pretty good full moon overall. And I kind of feel like it continues the vibes of again, wanting to create stability and peace and harmony, trying to counterbalance the intensity, the crisis moments for some people in their own personal lives, or even financial crisis for some people. This could be a temporary exaltation of help and some more stabilizing energy for people by midweek. But we have all these other things going on too in different ways. So there can be multiple things happening at the same time, both good or positive and negative. That's the way the world works. So that's what I have for the full moon. Let's move this forward here and go back to the hour. We just have those two main aspects, the full moon and the connection to the nodes of fate. So whatever's coming to light here, whatever's coming to a head midweek, it has this fateful connection to it. All right, so moving forward, we get to Thursday on November 6th. We have a ton of aspects going on for Thursday. We start things off with a lot of sextiles. The moon is at the end of Taurus for the first part of the day before it changes signs. So still exalted, still wanting to keep beauty and stabilize, still about money and resources. It's still full moon vibes as we come into Thursday, peak of energy. But the moon is connecting to Jupiter. So that's a pretty abundant aspect right there. Moon exalted, connecting to Jupiter. Exalted. So there's a feeling that we can have some emotional support. We can get our needs met here first thing on Thursday morning. This is super early for people in the U.S., so people in Europe can really feel this as they're awake and going through their first part of their day. And let's see, we have the moon also connecting to Saturn, which can show some emotional stability and maturity. At the same time, we have the moon making an in conjunction to Venus, and there's a finger of God pointing right towards Venus from the moon, and Neptune for the first part of the day, the morning hours, as Venus is reaching the last critical degree of Libra. So Venus is reaching a sense of urgency, money, resources at a sense of urgency for new developments by Thursday, well, Wednesday into Thursday really, and then also relationships at a sense of an urgency for a change of dynamics, or maybe some people or relationships could feel that there's a change in the air that's about to happen. Something new is about to start when it comes to love, pleasure, relationships from this point forward. But there's, with the finger of God aspect pointing towards Venus, it's also connected to things that are above and beyond us from a higher power, that are fateful or karmic, or things that are beyond our control could be shaping up too. But because the moon is in this good position of a minor grand trine between Saturn, Neptune, and Jupiter, it should indicate positivity for the first part of Thursday. But the moon will then change and reach Uranus, and things could start to really change perhaps as the day goes on. But we also have the moon again connecting to Neptune. But back to my point first, we do have to adjust to relationship changes or something about others and money for Thursday based on the full moon of what came to light. And then connecting to Neptune can be inspiring, dreamy, creative, artistic, spiritual, intuitive. And then Mars makes the sextile to Pluto. So we have this change of gears that's more adventurous, more active, more daring and risky and brave. In a sense, it still could be those things in Scorpio. Just Scorpio does it more controlled. And this is more, again, adventurous and fiery and passionate. But I think that this is also going to show a change generally for the military and the action plan and new military operations that are different in some way that are starting to come out this week. But with the sextile to Pluto, groups and community could also get more impassioned, enlivened, especially as the moon comes into Gemini with Uranus later on Thursday, opposes Mars and Mercury. So there's more passion, there's more power to our action that's available, generally speaking, especially if you have planets in the first few degrees of the fire and air signs, then you're really aligned with this in your own birth chart. That could give you an extra boost of power. But you still want to like check yourself, don't be too impulsive about it or too bold and blunt with your communications. That could get you in trouble. Sagittarius already has a reputation of being blunt with what they say, but add Mercury and Mars in opposition to Uranus and the moon, and people could really be saying what's on their mind without even thinking about it, and taking action in ways that they're not even thinking about either. But these are all pretty decent aspects first thing in the morning overall. And then the moon changes from Taurus to Gemini for the late morning or second half of the day, depending on where you live. And this is a change of mood. Moon coming into Gemini typically wants to be much more lighthearted and playful. But yeah, I think that could still be the general mood. But with moon on conjunct Uranus like that, plus the moon is, again, making these aspects, opposition to Mars, trine Pluto, it's going to be much more social, much more communicative, intellectual, witty and clever. So people could be pretty sharp with their communications while trying to disguise it in playfulness or joking around and things like that. But I really feel like this is going to show something going on with the streets, with traveling and transportation stuff here. So be very open and don't get too frustrated if you are traveling and there's disruptions going on. Again, it's not guaranteed that every single person will have an issue, but you just be prepared. Have a plan just in case, a backup plan. Could show, again, a lot of media, a lot of communications, a lot of multitasking, a lot of variety that's happening. People tend to be a lot more busy now with the moon opposite Mars in these two signs, plus Uranus and Mercury involved. So, again, it could show there could be new information, new communications, because as the moon is building up opposition with Mercury, again, it's kind of coming back to when the moon was conjunct Mercury, planting seeds for information that we're going to be processing with the retrograde now coming full circle, or not full circle, but to its culmination point, the high point, like a full moon between Mercury and the moon. So certain information, certain ideas or media could be coming to light, because it's still, there's a lot of light on the moon still, and it's now in a sign of information and communications. That's a change of flavor. Something different is most likely starting to show from this point forward. But now the moon here is being ruled by Mercury, so it comes right back to the Sagittarius side, and then the Sag is being ruled by Jupiter and Cancer, the emotional stuff, the home and the family, safety, security, comfort issues. And then that's ruled by the moon in Gemini. So we have this base still with Jupiter and Cancer slowing down, being more amplified about people's needs and their safety and their security concerns. That's really being talked about, the media, stories, news, information, social media. A lot of mental stimulation basically is coming through here. And it's more fiery, it's more passion because of Mars and the sextile to Pluto with the group and the community. This could also be even maybe something new about science and technology. Maybe there's something new coming out this week, some sort of new scientific development or some new technology that could be coming out. It's possible, I would think, with this. All right, and then we have, again, the conjunction of Moon Uranus, people's emotional freedom and independence, and a little bit of a wild card vibe. It's not the most stable. It could be exciting for some people and active and all that. And then, the final aspect is Moon opposite Mercury with that culmination of thought and ideas and things that we're going to be processing are kind of really at a high point of understanding and seeing it. But yet we don't have all the answers, and that's going to be part of the Mercury retrograde. So then we get to Friday on November 7. We have the moon waning. It's halfway through Gemini for Friday. Let me check my time here. I'm probably running late. And so we have the moon here. It's still being ruled by Mercury in Sagittarius. The lower, the everyday streets, the lower mind versus what's above and beyond in the bigger picture that we're still trying to figure out and look at. What is the future going to be about here? What's, we're trying to find that balance between the details versus the bigger picture of life for Thursday into Friday. It starts off with the moon in conjunct to the sun, so we're also having to make a lot of adjustments between our feelings, the inner life, the mood, and the circumstances versus where we're focused, which is Scorpio. The deep end, the Scorpio side, more private, more within, and more controlled, and more about feelings and intuition and reading between the lines and seeing the deeper motivations of things versus Gemini, intellectually trying to process it emotionally and looking at things, again, through a more intellectual perspective versus a more deeper intuitive perspective. But the inner and the outer are on two different pages. They're not helping each other. They're not flowing with each other well for Friday at first. And it's also a fateful day because the moon is T-squared the nodes of fate as we go through Friday, late morning, afternoon hours, depending on where you live. So we're at a fateful crossroads on Friday. Whatever's going on, it's fateful. It's going to affect the future in a major way that's more significant than just normal everyday stuff. And we're picking up on the influence between Virgo, the work, the health life, the things that we're going through these eclipses with, so many people losing their jobs and changing jobs and restructuring daily life and how we live daily life. We're having to adjust to those areas of life in some important way. We're having to adjust to what pulls us behind the scenes, our faith, our spirituality, our connection to, again, what's above and beyond, and also energetically what affects our daily life, our health, our work that has been negative that we're trying to make more positive for the future. And then Gemini, the media, the news, the information, the streets, the neighbors, siblings, something, and this is just generally speaking, but for some people it will be relevant, some sort of a fateful dynamic on Friday for siblings in some way or neighbors. These are the ways to look at this in a generalized way, of course, not for every single person. And then the media and the news could be putting the world at a crossroads with information in some way that has a strong effect on the future. So things like that are taking place. I call it a fateful day. And then this is where Uranus now changes signs and backs up into Taurus again. So we got a break. Taurus got a really, a short-term break of this Uranus transit, but now it's back for the next 6 months roughly. And Uranus is going to retrograde all the way back to 27 degrees. So that means people that have personal planets in Taurus from 27, 28, and 29 degrees, the last 3 degrees of the zodiac, you're still under a once-in-a-lifetime Uranus transit. All the other degrees of Taurus already went through their Uranus transit that changed a lot of Taurus's lives. That's including the sun in Taurus, but it could also be the moon. It could be your ascendant degree, where it's not just your rising sign Taurus. Like just because you have a Taurus rising sign doesn't mean that your exact degree of your ascendant is 27 through 29. You probably already went through Uranus rising on your ascendant for most of Taurus. There's just 3 degrees left that have to go through this revolutionary change. And you've already had one pass of this as Uranus went through those degrees. Now it's back. And then it's going to station and go through it again. So you have 2 more passes if you have anything from 27 to 29 Taurus. And that goes for the other fixed signs. If you have anything 27 to 29 of Aquarius, Leo, or Scorpio, then you're still under this once-in-a-lifetime Uranus transit that could be trying to change your life in a rare way. Taurus is usually super stable and secure, and it doesn't like to change too much. Well, this transit can really change people. And I've seen a lot of positive changes from this Taurus transit of Uranus. So one example is Tucker Carlson. when Uranus went over his sun, he got fired from Fox News, which seems like a negative event for a person getting fired. But then he went independent. He was liberated in a sense. That's what Uranus does. It tries to liberate us, but it can cause chaos or changes or unpredictability in the moment. But then in hindsight, it can lead to positivity. Now, I wish I could say it will always be positive for every single person, but it's not, because it all comes back to your birth chart and what other aspects are being triggered by it and the karma of the chart and all these other factors that we can't just generalize for every single person. But we can just generally say that there can be a change that you need in some way, because now look at Tucker and his own empire that he has on YouTube and his own personal business. He's more popular than ever, so that was a good change in hindsight. But that's just one example, and there's other examples of that. So if you have 27 through 29 Taurus, get ready for this next 6 months. You are at a life-changing point, especially if you have your sun there, your moon, or your exact ascendant degree. And then, other planets like Mercury, Venus, Mars, they can be affected as well. But, the moon, the sun, and the ascendant degree especially. And if you do have your ascendant at 27 through 29 Taurus, this is a liberating turning point for your life. And changes need to happen to help you be liberated. So again, it's also in the general scheme of things about money. Again, now that we've had that full moon, bring to light where we stand with money and resources. What do we need to change about how we work with money and our plans for the future, how we live our everyday life? What do we need to do to have more money for the future? We need to step outside the box. This is like the finalization. We've already been going through this for the last 5 to 6 years of trying to change how we work with the physical world and the 5 senses of pleasure and things like that and our values. So for the next 6 months, the world is at this revolutionary turning point about money and resources. And I'm not looking at it as a negative. The market always goes up and down, people. Like even the biggest dips that we've had, if we look at the S&P 500 or the SPY from the S&P since the 90s, the dot-com bubble was a big dip. We had the housing crisis was a big dip, but it always goes back up. So those dips are actually life-changing money opportunities for the world. And I get people mad at me saying, because they hate the stock market. They think that people have been predicting like the end of the U.S. and the end of society and everybody's always predicting major crisis events that really never come about. Yeah, we have a few years that we can get into a bear market, and that's okay. That's a part of how the market works. When you buy in on those dips, that's how you can become rich when it goes back up, if you're thinking long term. But if you're, you could lose everything too. That's a part of the gamble of the market. So anyway, I'm not trying to tell people to play the market or buy the market. I'm really just against people saying that they're anti and that I'm doing something wrong by speaking about the stock market, because the market has to go up and down. It can't just go up. That's a part of the system. It has to go down at times. But we're at all-time highs right now. For the last 6 months, like I was showing you, that we've reached this high point. And then we'll have another dip at some point, and then we'll go back up. That's just the name of the game. Okay, so here on Friday, November 7th, we had the change of Uranus back into Taurus. And that change is rolled by Venus. Oh, I forgot to say, Venus changes signs. Did I skip that on? I did. I skipped that part, I guess. Venus changing signs into Scorpio on Thursday. So, again, Thursday into Friday here. We'll just start off right here because I'm already on Friday. I don't want to backtrack. So Friday, this is where Venus is squaring Pluto. So we do have some pretty big changes, dynamic shifts for love and relationship and money Thursday into Friday. So again, this isn't where Venus is at its, spot of comfort. So it shows that relationships have to go to a deeper position now. They're more vulnerable. And next year, in the fall of 2026, this is where Venus will retrograde in Scorpio to Libra. So that'll be a major time for relationship stuff. But this is just temporary. We go through this every year. So again, in the general scheme of things, Venus doesn't really like being here, and it shows that there could be some issues with money and relationships that get a little more intense, including with friendships too, because Venus is squaring Pluto in Aquarius. So the financial dynamic with society, with that's going to be a part of the issue that's been ongoing about the food stamps thing and funding for certain groups and people. There's a turning point here in some way that's probably challenging. Venus is now being ruled by Mars in Sagittarius, and that comes back to, again, Jupiter in this position that shows people need safety and security and comfort and how they're feeling about it all. But even though Venus is in Scorpio, it still shows that Scorpio gets more love, gets more beauty, gets more attention now. It's still a little bit of a struggle for personal relationships as Venus is here. So there could be more fear. There could be more issues of jealousy and possessiveness in relationships, insecurities. There could be some, manipulation going on here. There could be intense passions and desires for people too. It doesn't always just mean negative, but it usually will play out in some challenges. But it also shows people's desires are going to a much deeper position. And with the square to Pluto, that could intensify it even more so. But it can also intensify all the shadow qualities of love. So be more cautious of that when you are dealing with one-on-one connections or friends or community. Know that there's this undercurrent of how people are feeling, that they're trying to disguise or hide about something. Again, there's a vulnerability here, generally speaking, for a relationship. But if you have personal planets in Scorpio, the first part of Scorpio, then you could be more attractive during this time of the year, especially if your sun is 1, 2, 3 degrees of Scorpio. Then Venus is adding, this more enhanced beauty and pleasure for you and attractiveness for you. You already have a little bit of that naturally, just being Scorpio. You attract people already, but you're also going through a Pluto transit. And so as Venus comes through here, there could also be some sort of a turning point about a financial matter in some way that gets activated for you at the end of this week. And I think markets will likely be reacting to this probably Thursday into Friday. So Wednesday, the middle of the week, might be kind of the turning point for the temporary vibes of the market. I'd be very surprised if things are, this is the thing. It's really hard to predict this market right now because of this Jupiter-Saturn trine that's in place that usually will show there's more potential for growth in the market, even though we reach this high point. So it's really hard to predict, but there's still some volatility that's most likely showing at the end of this week in general money and relationships and things like that. So some power plays and just, again, all the shadowy emotions that people get wrapped up into, like jealousy and control and stuff like that. So just don't fall into that trap and play that game. Just be honest, be real. And I think with Mars, Mercury here, because Venus is being ruled by Mars next to Mercury, I still think it's going to be a little more direct, than the average dynamic of Scorpio. All right, so I need to be moving on here. So we have that Venus change I forgot to mention on Thursday, but oh well. Venus square Pluto, it's intensified relationship and money and passion and pleasure. So try not to get obsessive too. Sometimes this can show an obsessiveness in love or with somebody or even with friends or something going on for Friday and just a couple days around this time period. And then the last aspect is the moon sextile Chiron. So people's confidence and how they feel about themselves is looking pretty good, but then the moon will come into Cancer and kind of change that as we get to this weekend on Saturday, November 8th, we start things off with the moon squaring Saturn at the end of Gemini. So it kind of like from this point forward, the mood really starts to change. The mood becomes more serious, a little more heavy. It changes that moon into Cancer, which is strong, but it's also more emotional, more watery again, more sensitive again. So it generally shows people come back into their internal world and their feelings again, even though that's still probably in the background this whole time period with all this water. But the moon was showing the temporary changes in Gemini, which was more intellectual. And now it feels like there could be a little bit of a block, a delay, a seriousness, a pressure, a stress that comes in really early, first thing on Saturday morning. But then that moon squares Neptune right before it changes signs. People could feel more emotionally confused, uncertain about something. They could feel extra sensitive. And from this point forward, it really will show that this next phase, people are extra sensitive and more moody and feeling based. So try not to get wrapped up in any kind of a stress first thing on Saturday morning. It could change as the day goes on. It could get better because when the moon comes into Cancer, it'll start to align with Venus, and then eventually the sun and this other water plus the moon will start to apply towards Jupiter. So this is only temporary. This like change of mood or vibes. People could feel tired on Saturday morning or wanting to retreat, go into their own world, a place of safety and comfort, and then that will be the change as the moon ingresses Cancer for Saturday morning. So now it's in its own sign, the moon in Cancer. And again, it's more guarded, more protective, but the circumstances still have to make an adjustment to Pluto in the group, in the community, and with Venus. I think it will be better for family relationships or this need for more emotional intimacy in romantic relationships as you get into Saturday, deeper into Saturday. But it's kind of at odds with the group, the friends, the outward part of your life, social life, versus the mood wanting to be more internal or private, and things like that. And then this is also the day where the sun is aligned with the nodes of fate. So the sun is shining a light on the north node of destiny, but it's water, it's intuitive. But things that are happening on Saturday could still kind of show you the path forward, show you where you're headed, or developments could show you that there's something that happens that could affect your future, and it feels like it's easier because it's a trine aspect that's happening this weekend, but it is fateful. Boy, I really, okay, got a little off track there. So then the next aspect is the moon at odds with Pluto, then the moon trines Venus, and then the moon is at odds with Mercury and Mars. So there's a little bit of a mixed bag on Saturday, some easy and mostly challenging ones. But there's this good aspect between moon and Venus. So again, going into a deeper emotional intimacy point with relationships, even family, but also romantic. It's more of what's unspoken because the moon is at odds with what's spoken. And here's Mercury, here's that S next to Mercury beginning to station retrograde. But the moon is also at odds with Mars, the outward activity, the communications, the more blunt, direct energy versus the more passive energy. So having to make an adjustment between the heart and the mind and the action versus the mood and what people feel like doing on Saturday. And that's pretty much all day on Saturday, those adjustments that are taking place. And then we get to Sunday, November 9. Moon is halfway through Cancer, and this is where Mercury is officially stationing retrograde. The moon aligns with the nodes of fate for the first aspect. So again, it continues to be a fateful time all through the weekend. The nodes of fate are being activated in multiple ways. But the main event is Mercury stationary retrograde. So Mercury is extra amplified when it's not moving. Everything about news and information in the outer world, transportation, traveling, media, everything is super amplified. A lot of mental stimulation going on in the outer world, but it's totally at odds with the feelings, the intuitiveness that people are feeling, in the home and the family vibes. And there's still a pretty good emotional energy here because the moon is applying towards Jupiter exalted. Moon and Jupiter is pretty good. People have a big appetite. They want comfort food or other things that are enjoyable and comfortable and, all the more internal private stuff versus what's going on in the outer world, the outer life. But now that Mercury has gone as far forward as it can, it's going to be retrograde from this point forward. So you got to ask yourself, what have you been thinking about for the last couple weeks? Because Mercury is going to go back over that territory where it was in Scorpio into Sag. So this last couple weeks with this change of Mercury from Scorpio to Sagittarius, just ask yourself, has there been anything on your mind that's rare or ongoing? Have you had any communications or information that's come in the last couple of weeks that you're thinking about more than normal? So if that's the case, I think that there's going to be a process that you're in that's starting with this, that you're going to kind of be thinking about these things really for most of the rest of 2025, because it won't be until mid-December that Mercury gets back to this point and starts moving forward into new territory. Now, there is going to be a Gemini full moon on December 4, ruled by Mercury direct in Scorpio, and that will start to be a turning point where, we're going to start to kind of get this culmination of what we've been thinking about and the process that we're starting right now with the Mercury retrograde that will kind of come to a head by December. But then even the first couple of weeks after the full moon in Gemini, Mercury will still be in its shadow until it moves forward past this and we enter new territory with our thoughts, ideas that we're processing. And there could be a lot of something unusual or something radical or something different that this Mercury retrograde is going to have us processing because of the opposition to Uranus, and it went from Gemini back to Taurus. So it also involves money and resources and the things that have come up with this Taurus full moon for us to see where we stand with money and resources is going to have a connection to what we're processing for the future and what's next and where we're headed with certain things about money, sharing of money or investments or, again, the Taurus Scorpio axis here. But also now that Mercury has stopped, Mars is going to be catching back up. And it's still going to be a lot of mental tension and a little bit of fierceness, and again, very strong opinions and beliefs that are being communicated. And again, with Mars next to Mercury, it can still show some issues, mechanical issues or technology issues, because Mars is adding a little more of a conflict and then plus the opposition to Uranus. But just know that there's something here that we have to process for all of November and half of December before we're clear totally and moving forward with it. And we'll see more and more as time goes on what that is. But it's also a great time if you need to go back and complete things, finish things that are undone, anything that needs your attention. It's a great time to go back and take care of things that aren't completely finished, and whatever that is, it can be different things for different people. So Mercury is mercurial, everything about writing, publishing. These are the signs of writing and publishing. Do you need to go back and fix errors or rewrite something, or do you have to communicate something with somebody still that's not quite settled? There's just things, mercurial things that aren't quite settled. It's Mercury retrograde. We go through it 3 times a year, so we're used to it. But it's not like, me, I don't get all carried away with Mercury retrograde. Oh my God, it's the worst thing ever. Every Mercury retrograde will depend on the aspects that it's making. Now, this one has something different about it because of Mars involved. It has a little more tension involved. The opposition to Uranus adds a little more of unpredictability and surprises and things that can happen, that you weren't expecting. but it has the sextile to Pluto. It has these connections that it's been making the last 2 weeks in positive ways too, that we're going to go back through. So it's going to try to help us see something that we need to see and process. In other cases, it could be a literal process that we're entering with something. Say somebody needs to go get their driver's license. Well, they have to go through the permit process first. It's a whole process. It could be different for everybody, no matter what it is. So the people that are most affected, I think, will be the people that have a planet here at 6 to 7 degrees, 5, 6, 7 degrees roughly of Sagittarius. Mercury's at 6 degrees, 51 minutes as it's stationary. So if you have a planet right at 6 degrees of Sagittarius, you're really connected to this Mercury retrograde process for the next several weeks. So those are the people that are most affected by that. And then the moon is trine the sun for Sunday. So that's where the heart, the inner and the outer are actually on the same page. They're both in water. It's more feeling based, more intuitive, everything private below the surface, behind the scenes, and a lot more intuition going on here. And it can be still somewhat cooperative with the moon and the sun, helping each other out. And then the last aspect is the moon squaring Chiron as it starts to reach Jupiter. So again, it picks up on that tension that we've already been dealing with for a while of Aries versus Cancer, home, family versus self, emotions and feelings versus confidence, safety, security issues, wounds, injuries. And then we get to Monday on November 10, and the moon has reached Jupiter. And that's a really good, usually a really solid, secure placement of needs and feelings and big emotions and generosity and home and family stuff. And plus the moon conjunct Jupiter is activating the Jupiter trine Saturn. Again, we're not going to get a perfect Jupiter trine Saturn out of this, but they're close enough. They're within less than they're a half a degree here away. I mean, that's a solid, good trine. And that is helpful overall for being able to expand and grow. But at the same time, this is an area of our chart, 25 Cancer, where we have gone as far forward as we can for the rest of this year. But we have great support at the 25 degree marks of the water and earth placement. So if you have 25 degrees in your chart of water or earth, you really do have some good transits right now that are helping you and supporting you that will continue. And you may not be seeing all the results instantly, but it's a longer term aspect. But still, there's, some good support, good feelings here, but there's still some sensitivity, some issues in the background because of the square going on to Chiron. So again, the moon is with Jupiter on Monday morning. It's trine Saturn, it's trine Neptune. Again, super intuitive and dreamy and creative and imaginative. Super watery though, super emotional and sensitive. Still guarded and protective. But there will be a change of mood as the day goes on because the moon now the moon is also sextile Uranus back in Taurus here. So again, the moon is connecting to everything. There's a lot of different influences that we're picking up on for Monday morning, being supported in a lot of ways though. And then the moon ingresses Leo. And this is a big change for the mood for the second half of the day on Monday. Now the moon coming into Leo builds the opposition with Pluto. So things become more passionate. Now that the moon is in Leo, it's being ruled by the sun in Scorpio. And next week we'll be building up to the last quarter moon phase between Leo and Scorpio. Kind of gets dramatic, it gets more passionate. It's fire versus water. But the moon in Leo wants to be bold, and people want to express themselves in more outward, bold, creative ways. And that's kind of going against this water energy of what's below the surface and more emotional and hidden and not as outward. Plus the Scorpio vibes are, again, they don't need the attention. They don't need the spotlight in the way that the moon in Leo does. The moon in Leo, shows people want to dance and be happy and kind of more dramatic in how they feel and how they express themselves. But there's also this opposition to the community. There's like a social dynamic that comes in for the second half of Monday that's intense and powerful, and a little bit of extremism could be showing, and intensity could be showing on Monday afternoon with this change of mood. But people want to play, be more creative, have more fun, have more social connections. And the moon here in Leo does align well now with Mars and Mercury as the day goes on. So there's an outlet for more action, more creativity, more adventure, more social life, more communications and passion. But at the same time, the moon squares Venus. And again, the feelings are at odds with the desires to go deep, to have this vulnerability, this intimacy, this more private emotional connection versus Leo that's prideful. You know, when it's in a square, it can be prideful. There could be ego stuff. There could be a clash in relationship and how people are feeling. Maybe they're not feeling like they're getting enough attention or recognition or love, you know, and just a little bit of a clash there. But if you're more outward, if you're playing, if you're having fun, if you're being creative, being active in a more outward way, then I think that there's a better opening to feel more satisfied and flowing with that versus trying to get this connection in a deeper way that's a little bit challenged in this moment with how people are feeling, between their feelings and their desires clashing. It could get a little dramatic. So try not to fight for something that you want or you need from somebody else here on Monday afternoon or Monday evening. Just let this pass. But it's also connected to the moon building up to square the sun too. The last quarter moon that I'll talk about next week when I come back for next week's report. So that's how I'm seeing everything, folks. I should probably wrap this up. So I hope it's helpful, and I appreciate you watching. And I'm wishing you the very best for the week ahead. You take good care.